Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for waiting for me for a long time. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Nadia, coming from China, and I'm really happy to see many of my old friends here, as well as many who, like me, have come over from Potsdam last weekend. It feels so sweet, just like coming back home. And my today's talk is about the development of open source in China. Before we dive into the topic, please allow me to give a brief introduction of myself. I'm Nadia, and I come from China. This is my profile. I'm the COO of SigmaFort, the largest developer Q&A community in China with over 7 million registered users, and the co-founder and PPMC member of Apache Answer. And in my spare time, I volunteer in many local open source communities and societies in China. You can see many of them here, and many of which I will mention later in my talk. What is really interesting is that when submitting my proposal, actually I chose the open source track, but my presentation was eventually selected into the government policy and law track. So let's start today's talk from the perspective of the government policies. And has anyone here ever heard of China's 5-year plans? Please raise your hand. Oh, many of you have heard about that. Actually, in China, the government releases a 5-year plan and long-range objectives every 5 years. These are the most important policy documents in China, guiding the economic and social development guiding the economic and social development of the nation. And in 2021, China released its 14th 5-year plan. And for the first time, open source was included in the National Key Strategic Plan. And in November 2021, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, based on the aforementioned document, published the 14th 5-year plan for the development of the software and information technology services industry. It mentioned the goal of building 2 to 3 internationally influential open source communities and incubating more than 10 high-quality open source projects. The plan is aiming to enrich the domestic open source ecosystem, develop foundations and other organizations to improve open source software governance and promotion open source culture, gather excellent open source talents, and build an open source software ecosystem. It is also emphasized to strengthen the exchanges and cooperation with international organizations and foundations. Actually, the plan has greatly accelerated the development of open source in China. The local government then released a series supporting policies for open source commercial companies, including R&D funding, subsidies, tax reductions, provision of free offices, and many policies. And these policies was released on the one hand because of the development of China's software industry has entered a new period with the focus shifting from application software to the basic software. And in addition, it is also related to the global competitive landscape and the security of the software supply chain. And it is believed that the development of open source software can make better use of collective intelligence and help people to develop the software faster and better, make up for the deficiencies and gain a stronger competitive advantage. And the policies across different provinces and cities have significantly boosted investment in open source startups, resulting in the funding and growth of numerous open source companies. And you can see many startups here. And a standout example is PingCap, the company behind TidyB, which secured hundreds of millions of dollars in Series E round, a remarkable achievement. And you can see the PingCap here. It just finished the Series E round funding. And as the chart shows here, it is clear that many open source companies in China have experienced impressive financing rounds, reflecting the vibrant and growing open source ecosystems in the country. And at the same time, an increasing number of big enterprises increased their contributions to open source, such as Huawei, Alibaba, Ant Group, Baidu, and others. And you can see the chart here illustrates the ranking of these companies' global influence in open source collaboration in the recent years. And this trend isn't just a result of the government policy support, but also deeply connected to the company's own strategy. For example, you can see Huawei. Huawei turned to open source as a key strategy direction following the start of US sanctions in 2019 and significantly enhancing its global influence. You can see this is Huawei. And Ant Group has shown impressive performance in the past 3 years and officially entered the top 10 globally in 2023. And you can see this is Ant Group. It increased rapidly in these 3 years. And before 2021, Alibaba was a leader in open source within China and has maintained its position as 6th in the world to this date. And you can see this is Alibaba. You can see it continuous contribution to the open source. And the OpenUK algorithm was used to assess the global influence of companies in open source collaboration. And the algorithm itself is quite complex and it's challenging to fully explain it in today's talk. But if you are interested in that, you can look into related papers by our community member. And here are the links. And beyond the support from the government, the period from 2020 to 2023 has seen a surge in open source participation across China, with many new forces joining the movement. Understanding the roles these entities play in China's open source ecosystem can give us a comprehensive view of this. And these participants can be broadly categorized into five groups, and the government and institutions, open source foundations, communities and societies, research institutes and colleges, and enterprises. And now let's begin from the government. Government entities involved in open source can be divided into 3 categories. You can see that. And the first one is what we mentioned before, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, MIIT, which is responsible for setting macro policies. And the next one is the local governments to implement supporting policies in different provinces and cities. And the third one, there are some research institutions under the MIIT, like CAICT, China Academy of Information and Communications Technology, and CESI, China Electronics Standardization Institute, which mainly act as think tanks for the government and are responsible for drafting and establishing related standards. And for example, we can see the well-known Mulan open source license was led and completed by the CESI. This is the Mulan license. Additionally, China has established its own domestic open source foundations, which are different from others in that they operate under the leadership and supervision of government departments. And these open source foundations primarily focus on project incubation, open source education, and the advocacy of open source culture. And currently, China has 2 open source foundations. The first one is OpenUK, and the second one is the Change Foundation. A particularly representative project being incubated by OpenUK is the Open Harmony. And communities and societies are also playing crucial roles in promoting open source education and culture in China. For example, Sigma Ford, where I'm currently working for, and the China Open Source Alliance, 开源社, are key players in this field. This is what we did in China. Sigma Ford has founded such projects like the top 33 pioneers of Chinese open source and Chinese open source heroes list, and set up a serious support programs for open source projects and independent developers, which aim to help the open source projects and developers get more support and attention in the community. And the China Open Source Alliance, 开源社's COSCON, is the only open source conference in China entirely organized by the community volunteers. The operation of the conference draws significant inspiration from the FOSDEM and the Taiwan's COSCAP, while its organizational structure is mainly learned from the governance of the Apache Software Foundation. And you can see some picture of our last year's COSCON. Additionally, there are also many other organizations, such as the Apache Local Community Linux Foundation APAC Evangelist Team, CCF Open Source Development Committee, CIC Open Source Technology Committee, and so on. And the fourth one is the research institutes and colleges, which are mainly focusing on open source education. For example, the Chinese Academy of Sciences found a project called OSPP. You can consider that like the fork of Google Summer of Code to encourage more college students to participate in open source. And this has been running for several years. It is a very successful practice in China. Meanwhile, open source has found its way into university courses. For example, Professor Wang Jianmin from Tsinghua University founded the IoTDB project, which has already graduated from the Apache Incubator to become a top-level project, and its core team's commercial venture, Tamaco Technology, has announced the completion of nearly 100 million RMB in angel round financing. And also the enterprises mentioned before, which pay more attention to open source compliance, strategy, and business. And companies from various sectors have been setting up open source program offices, OSPOs, in recent years. And last year, we also hosted the first OSPO Summit in China, marking a significant milestone in promoting open source practices with businesses. You can see some pictures of our OSPO Summit. It is the first OSPO Summit in China. And within the increasing contributions of these diverse organizations, open source culture is taking root and growing in China, and the number of open source developers in the country is rapidly increasing. Let's take a look at this screenshot from the GitHub Octopus report 2022. We can see that over 20.5 million new users joined GitHub from all over the world, and China was one of the fastest growing regions for open source developers outside the United States. And in summary, open source in China is developing rapidly, presenting numerous opportunities, and with its vast market and sizable audience, China is a key market for people who want to promote their open source projects, who hopes to get more users and contributors. And despite the current challenges, such as widespread misunderstanding about open source among companies and some restrictions on internet exercise and some debates on whether the government's approach to supporting open source is correct or not, I'm optimistic that things will improve. And I have been dedicated to serving as a connector and advocate for Chinese open source projects and companies going global. And if anyone wishes to discuss open source in China, feel free to contact me anytime. And that's the end of my talk. China is a booming market ready to be explored. I encourage all of you to consider diving into it, collaborating with Chinese companies and attending Chinese tech conferences. And if you got any plans or need a hand, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And it's my WhatsApp, my email address, and my social media platforms. And part of my insights and data today was selected from the 2023 China Open Source Annual Report initiated by the Chinese Open Source Alliance, Kaiyuan Shu. And this report will be officially released tomorrow. And English version will also be available, and I will share it on my social media platforms, and I welcome everyone to follow me to the updates. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to give a talk at the State of OpenUK, and for friends in China who have given me courage to come here and deliver this talk. And it's great to meet you here, and I look forward to having more discussion with you off stage. Thank you.